Bonjour et merci à vous d'être venus aussi nombreux. Un peu par provocation, Rob, je commencerai cet échange par une phrase de Margaret Thatcher qui disait « There is no alternative ». Il n'y a pas d'alternative. Donc il n'y a pas d'alternative au libre-échange, il n'y a pas d'alternative à la globalisation de l'économie. Pourtant, depuis 2006, Rob Hopkins et bien d'autres incarnent une forme d'alternative et l'ironie savoureuse veut que cette alternative soit née dans le pays même où Margaret Thatcher a dit qu'il n'y avait pas d'alternative. Donc Rob Hopkins nous fait l'honneur effectivement d'être ici pour nous présenter à la fois les principes, le pourquoi de ce qu'il appelle la transition et à la fois la forme qu'elle prend et sa mise en œuvre. Je pense que vous en avez tous eu un petit aperçu à l'orée de cette salle lorsque Rob vous a demandé de vous situer géographiquement et de vous redéployer dans l'espace. J'en ai eu un aperçu moi-même hier en assistant à cet atelier que Marnix Bonny vient de mentionner et où Rob, qui aurait pu prendre une posture d'autorité et présenter de manière très docte devant une assemblée silencieuse les grands principes de la transition, a finalement très peu pris la parole et s'est contenté d'animer par des jeux, etc., de mettre les gens en relation et de les amener à se raconter, à discuter, à partager des expériences, à dire aussi parfois leurs difficultés et leurs réussites, etc. Et finalement, c'était vraiment une manière d'entrer dans la transition et de voir quels en sont les grands principes, l'horizontalité, un caractère assez joyeux aussi, spontané, enthousiaste, etc. Donc forcément, revenir dans un format qui semble être celui de la conférence nous semblait complètement contradictoire avec l'idée même de transition et avec les grands principes que défend Rob Hopkins. Et c'est la raison pour laquelle on a plutôt envisagé quelque chose qui soit de l'ordre de la conversation et où on aimerait qu'il y ait un temps relativement important pour que vous aussi puissiez prendre la parole. Et c'est la raison pour laquelle, avant peut-être d'entrer au cours de ce dialogue dans ce qu'est la transition et dans la manière dont elle se met en œuvre, Rob Hopkins, je crois, vous souhaitiez proposer une nouvelle activité au public. Est-ce que vous pouvez la présenter?
Okay. Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. I would like to give you an activity to do. Thank you for doing the one that we did out in the hall. I think it's very useful to get a sense of who are the people around me who I could connect with if you're inspired by this. In a moment, I'm going to show you a picture of an object. And it is an object that you encounter most days in your daily life. And I would like to invite you to find a partner, really somebody you didn't know before you came, a complete stranger, and I'm going to give you 1.5 minutes to think of as many different uses for this object as possible. Okay, so they can be ridiculous, they can be fantastical, they can be sensible. You don't have to be thinking, is this an economically viable solution? You're just thinking of ideas and keeping a note of how many ideas you come up with in the 1.5 minutes. Is that okay? Is that clear? Have a look around, see who your partner might be. Okay, so everybody happy you have a partner? Okay, alors, you have 1.5 minutes and they start now. I changed it to a different one. I like this one. one of the best ones is when I was in Sweden, a woman, because then I asked people for how many ones they were really proud of, and one woman said, I would use it to keep the darkness in. I'm still a bit worried about that one. Okay, thank you very much. So, could you put your hands up if you thought of more than 5? Okay. If you thought of more than 10? Okay. Okay, more than 15? Okay. So, does anybody have, did you come up with any where you thought, oh, I really hope we get the opportunity to share that brilliant idea with all these other people? Would anybody like to share one that they were very proud of? Yeah.
Je pense que ça pourrait servir à étouffer une rumeur.
Oh, okay. Good. Very nice. Another one? Come on, I give us 1 or 2. Yes. Une bombe. Okay. Merci. Je pense. Une autre. Paper basket. Thank you. I do this exercise often when I start talks, and this talk today is the last talk on a 3-week speaking tour that I've been to Sweden and Mallorca and France and Paris and many places. And so when I was in Sweden, I did this exercise, and one woman said, I would use it to keep the darkness in, which I'm still still very strange. I don't know quite what that meant. But anyway, so the reason that I did this activity with you is this is an activity which is about exercising your imagination. And when I look out and you're all doing that activity, you're all awake and alive and bright and focused and laughing. And for me, that's really the character, the spirit that we need to be engaging with the challenges that the world faces now. But before I go any further, we're just going to stop for a short commercial break.
Ask all recipes for a shrimp pasta recipe.
Oh.
My recommendation
It's a bit glitchy and strange.
Shrimp and pasta.
Why is that? Can we start it again?
Ask all recipes.
Well, it's a bit glitchy and strange, but shall I run it anyway? It's only a minute, and you'll get the idea.
For a shrimp pasta recipe.
My recommendation is champagne shrimp and pasta recipe. Main ingredients are shrimp.
No, that's horrible, isn't it? Oh, well, anyway, sorry. So there was an advert for Amazon, which normally plays really, really well. And it's an advert that is running at the moment where that woman goes to her fridge and she's having a dinner party, and all she has in her fridge is some shrimps. So she asks this new thing that you can get from Amazon called the Amazon Wand for recipes including shrimps. And the Amazon Wand says, I recommend basically making pasta and tomato sauce out of a jar and some of that horrible cheese that smells like sick that comes in a little pot with the shrimps on top. And that advert, for me, when you see it in its entirety, really captures what it looks like when we run out of imagination. It feels to me at the moment, at the time when we need to be at our most imaginative, we are actually living in a time of kind of unprecedented imaginative poverty. And you might have seen this image from Portugal last week, and which is like something from Revelations or something. You know, and because we live, I think, at a time when we look back over the last 100 years, the sinking of the Titanic in the inquiry was blamed on a failure of imagination. The Apollo 1 inquiry said it was a failure of the imagination. The 2008 banking crisis was put down to a failure of the imagination, as were many, many other things. And for me, I keep wondering, well, why is that? Because climate change, for me, is really the ultimate failure of the imagination. Could we really not imagine something better than ending up in a situation where we see something like this? So for me, what we try and do in transition is to really encourage imagination, to cherish it, to bring it to the fore, to get together with other people, create spaces where we can imagine something else. Because that Amazon story is really a story that takes us nowhere. So what I want to share with you is the transition story, because I feel like the current story, the economic growth story, is really a completely inappropriate story. The scientists tell us we have to cut emissions by 8, 9, 10% a year, starting now. This is already happening, what we see in Portugal. This is really, really serious. And so it goes beyond just having more energy efficient homes, different kind of buses that run on renewable energy, solar power, that kind of thing. It's a profound shift in how we live together, how we live on the planet, and the scale on which we do things. We started Transition in 2005, and it's now active in 50 countries around the world, in thousands of places. And last year was our 10th anniversary, and we've always said it's an experiment. I don't know how to do this. None of us know how to do this. But if enough of us try and work it out together, maybe we can work it out. If enough places are experimenting and sharing their learnings, then maybe we can figure it out. So I want to pick some of these out of here and to tell you about them and go into a bit more detail. So the first one is about telling stories, telling great stories. And this is one of my favorite transition stories. This gentleman here is called Leo, and he's a journalist, and he's a kind of a sustainability consultant. He's a very busy man. He's always walking around with his mobile phone, always very busy. And one day he broke his foot, so he couldn't walk fast anymore. The doctor said, you need to walk around, keep exercising, but on crutches. So he could only walk very, very slowly. Never walked slowly in his neighborhood before, so he saw it very differently. He started to see that in some places there were grapes growing. And one day, and he read a story in his local newspaper about a woman who had died, who nobody had found her body for 6 years. And he thought, that could be me. I don't know anybody on my street. If that happened to me, nobody would know. So one day he was walking in the park and he met this man here. And he said, I don't know to this day why I asked him, but I asked him. And he said, excuse me, my friend, do you know how to make wine? And the man said, my friend, the soles of my feet are still purple from the first 29 years of my life. So they created this idea to have a project and to make wine in the street. They made like a pit, and they invited everybody on the street, and everybody bought food and wine and got involved for the first time they'd ever met each other. Now I have to tell you that the wine is absolutely disgusting. But that's not the point. It doesn't matter. I have a bottle of it at home, and I'm never going to drink it. But that's not the point. The point of it is we live in a society with an epidemic of loneliness. And we become more and more isolated from each other, and we see many of the impacts of that. Acute loneliness is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's a public health problem. So I like telling these stories. This is in Bristol, where they have the Bristol pound, local currency in the city of Bristol, used now in hundreds and hundreds of businesses, that you can pay your local taxes with it, you can pay your business rates with it, you can buy bus tickets, train tickets, you can pay your energy bills using a local currency. The previous mayor of Bristol took his entire salary in local currency. The lovely thing about when you make your own money is, what stories will you tell? You have all these sides of paper to put a story on. This is a story from the history of Bristol that you won't find in the museum. This is a story about when the bus company brought in a ban to say only white people could drive buses. And then there was, in the 1960s, and there was a boycott of the buses for 3 years before they changed the policy. It's not a story you find in the history books, but you find it on their notes. And I think all of this matters because we need to be telling stories about the future. Whatever happened to the future? When I was a child, we talked about the future all the time, how amazing it was going to be. People don't really talk about the future so much anymore. But actually, for me, there is no reason why we can't be telling stories about the future that are delicious and compelling, and that we wake up in the morning saying, that's going to happen. I want to see that kind of future. Not that involves these rather strange kind of shoes, like people imagined in the 90s. The future even had its own superhero in the 1950s. We don't really do that anymore. So for me, we need the stories about the future and what we could create here. We live in a time, I think, when it can feel like everything is very fixed, everything is very rigid, and we can't really change very much. And particularly when I travel around France with different communities, people say, oh, we can't change anything. Everything comes from the top. We can't do anything at all. But there's always opportunities, I think. This is my 15-year-old son's favourite place in the whole world. This is a forest near where I live in a place called Dartmoor. Some of you might have visited Dartmoor at some time. We walk here often, and I sometimes think this is a beautiful example of the kind of economy we try to create in transition. When it rains on this forest, that water is broken up into a fine mist, and that mist is then held by the moss, by the bark. The soil is like an enormous sponge. The leaves are like a lake floating in the sky. And then that water is held there and moved very slowly, very carefully. It's retained in that system and cycled as many times as possible. In a really big forest, the forest makes its own weather, cycles that water very smartly. That's a brilliant model for how money should move in our local economies. The money that comes into Dunkerque should do as much as it can and be passed between everybody as many times as possible before it leaves. If a neoliberal economist designed this forest, it would look very different. We would put guttering around the top of the trees. The rain would then go into a pipe and then down away to a big tank owned by one company. That's not how it works in a forest. It's about relationship, complexity, connection. And that's how our local economies should work, I think. This is my friend Halle. And this is a day about 6 months ago when my town of Totnes, for the first time in 100 years, had a mill again. And she crowdfunded from the community £27,000 to make a mill. And there's various equipment around here outside of the photograph. What I find really exciting is over the last 60 years, this concentration, we've gone on this journey towards more and more monoculture. We have bigger and bigger supermarkets, Amazon trying to control all the food supply in the world, these massive companies. And that's been a closing down of the small bakeries, the small brasseries, the abattoirs, all of that infrastructure that gave our local food its distinctiveness, its delicious local regional characteristics have gradually been closed as we move in that direction. When I get really excited, when I get goosebumps, is when I start to see what the move looks like in the other direction. And if you look at the explosion of the craft beer movement in the United States, you get a flavor of it, where in the last 10 or 15 years, they've moved to a situation where 20% now of all the beer drunk there is made in small, independent craft breweries that are connected to place and are telling a different story. And as they grow, they create a demand for people to start making their ingredients in a different way. And it grows and you build a momentum. This is a brewery that I started in my town. I think, what's the best way to connect with people? Is it to talk about climate change? Is it to make beer? Maybe. We made a beer for the launch of the mill using spelt flour that they had grown. And we used that to make beer. So they now make pea flour. They make their own oats. They make different sorts of flour. So we start to think, ooh, what could we brew with that? We made a beer using pea flour. It was delicious. As you start to move in that direction, possibilities start to open up. We have a hop club. We have 70 people, houblon. I know some good French words, you see. So we have 70 people who grow hops in their garden to make beer. Even if they've only made enough to half fill a teacup, they bring it in and we go, yes, fantastic, this is really good. So you build a community around this idea of doing things in a different way. This is a story from Liège, which is a beautiful example of that. So in Liège, Liège en transition started about 7 or 8 years ago, and they have many, many projects. And about 5 years ago, they launched this thing called ceinture alimentaire, which you can all say much better than me, I'm sure. And the idea was, let's create a belt of food production around the city. So we will connect, once again, the land around the city with the city itself. They created these 2 shops in the center of Liège, big space, paint it white, food in boxes, tell the story of the producer. Very simple, really, really successful. They now have 55 hectares of land growing vegetables, 60 hectares growing grains. On one of the micro farms, they're going to build this building very soon, which will be a place that will create more jobs by processing that food to make other things using that food. They have this model where they want to create different, every year they add in new businesses. So recently they started a cooperative that collects all the waste coffee and uses it to grow shiitake mushrooms, oyster mushrooms. Every year they add new businesses to this tapestry. And you might think, yeah, well, Rob, now, that's all very well, but it's small and it's community scale, and is it really going to change very much? Well, the really exciting thing about ceinture alimentaire, and I only heard this about 3 weeks ago when I was on my way traveling, was that the municipality of Liège, who are responsible for 620,000 people, just published their 20-year vision strategy for the whole region. And they took ceinture alimentaire's plans and put them straight into their own plans. So in their plan now they say that 10% of the land, of the total area, will be used for alternative agriculture. And it will create 5,000 jobs. And it will be about 70% of the food consumed in the city of Liège. For me, that's really, really exciting, because you start to see what it looks like when we start to move back in this direction. And the possibilities that then start to open up. If I was 18 now, if I was 20, I'd be so excited by the potential of that story. I could start a brewery, I could grow mushrooms, I could become an urban farmer. I think we're about 5 years away from being a really good urban farmer, growing food in the middle of the city, being just the coolest occupation anybody could ever want to have. And already in Berlin, I love going to Berlin and meeting people. I met this incredible woman who was a beekeeper, an urban beekeeper. She had these beautiful bee tattoos on her arms. And she said, yeah, and I have many friends who are urban gardeners who have like kale and lettuce leaves tattooed on their arm. I wonder, I think maybe being an urban farmer becomes just the hippest kind of job you could ever have. So be creative and open and playful. It's one of the things I love about transition, is that it's something, is that it's fun. Richard Heinberg once said that transition is more like a party than a protest march. This is in Tooting in London. Transition Tooting have many people involved who are creative, artistic people. And Tooting is like an area of London. It's a big high street with lots of shops. It doesn't have anywhere that's like a square or a village green. It doesn't have any of that. But they do have this area here, which is a bus turning circle. This is where the buses all wait. Normally this place is full of buses, and the buses are just waiting for someone to go, come on, you're needed over here. Transition Tooting said that would be the place that should be our village green. So let's spend a day living as though that had actually already happened. There was music, there was food, there were games for children, there was even grass. So people spent the day living as though it was already a village green. The drummers came from the local Sikh temple. I got to take my shoes and socks off in the middle of London on a summer's day and sit with my feet on the grass of this pop-up village green. And people, for the first time, started looking, and they could see this big wall here of the big shop. They never noticed it before because they just walked past very, very quickly. And I heard so many conversations of people saying, oh, what could we do on that wall? What should we paint on there? How will we tell our story on that wall? What could we put on there? And when I spoke to the organisers afterwards, they said, this day worked really, really well because people now know what it feels like if that place is a village green. And once you have experienced that, you would never really want to go back. In the same way that once you've drunk really, really nice craft beer, you could never drink Heineken ever again. So put care at the centre. I think sometimes we don't talk about care enough in the movements that are trying to change things. You know, many people's experience of the organisations we work in don't show a great deal of care to the people who work there. This is a transition group in the north of England where they've taken a farm over from their local council. It was a farm, the council didn't really want it. The community now have it, their community owns it, but they run it as a place that provides care for local people who need it in the context of growing food, learning to cook, learning those kind of skills. But fundamentally, it's about learning to care for each other in a better way. And invest in your community. I think the scale of the change we need to see over the next 5 or 10 years is enormous. And at the moment, most of us wake up every day and we turn on the news and we see the stories of terrible things happening around the world, which often are funded by our pension plans and are funded by the banks that we put our money with. If we can create the models where we can invest into our own community to make change happen, that's really exciting. If you could walk around Dunkerque every day and you could see that the money you had invested in the bank was changing things where you lived, wouldn't life look a bit different? This is in the city of Bath, where they created their own energy company, community-owned energy company, with a model that meant people could move their pension into a community energy company. They've raised £13 million from local people, which is being invested in renewable energy, and some of that is people moving their pensions into this kind of a model. You know, when we do that, we're able to really accelerate the pace of change that we need to see. And enabling communities to own things. I'm a great believer that if we really want to change things, we need to own things together. This is in my town. This is an old factory. This was the biggest employer up until 2007, employed about 170 people. It had been a milk factory for about 70 years, and they processed milk from about 1,300 farms around where we live. So when it closed, it was a big, big blow to the local economy and to many, many people. And we started a campaign for the community to decide what happened here. And in 2014, we signed an agreement with the company who owned it to say that we would get the planning permission. We would design what happened there. And this is the day when we were able to announce to the community that we had signed that agreement. It was one of the most memorable days of my life. And we then started a consultation. We consulted in a town of 8,000 people, about 5,000 people, put their ideas in. But we didn't just look at the future. What should the future of this place be? We made a space to say, well, what about the past? How can we? The past of this place really matters to a lot of people. So the first room people came into was about the past. Tell us your stories. This man came in on the first day. He's called Mike. He said, I lost my job here in 2007, and I was off work with depression for the next 6 years. He said, today is the first day I have been back here since the day I lost my job. And he cried. He brought in a photograph of his own father working there in the 1950s. And over the period of time, it became a kind of self-organized museum to that place. It was really extraordinary. This man here, if there are any men here who collect things, it tends to be men who collect things. And their partners go, would you ever just throw that rubbish away? And you go, no, 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 one day someone will really appreciate this great collection of things that I have here. You'll enjoy this story. Because this man in the 1970s had amassed a collection of about 50 of these milk bottles at the time that had adverts on them. And I'm sure his wife said, just throw them away. They take up so much space. And he brought them into us and we said, oh, fantastic, wonderful. And they became one of the key bits of that exhibition. So we ran a process for about 8 months, well, about a year and a half it was, for the community to design what happened at this place. And this is what they designed, based around what the community needed. Not what we thought they needed, but what the people felt they needed. So it's 65 homes that are actually affordable for local people, a hotel as a community enterprise. These are workshop spaces for new businesses. This will be a shop. There'll be a school for food entrepreneurs, a new building for public events and music and things. The most important bit about it, though, is that when it's built, the whole thing will be owned by the community. We own it. So as it generates revenue every year, we can put that into other things. We can choose. We could build more houses. We can support more enterprises. We can do all kinds of different things. So owning things makes a real difference in our ability to make the kind of change we want to see. And celebrate failure. We live in a time where, I mean, how many people live in work in a company where if you fail at something, they go, oh, that's great. We don't have many spaces in our life today where we can take that kind of risk. But in transition, we say, just try things. Just try. This was a big project we tried to do in my town. We were going to turn this into an urban farm. It was going to be really great. But it didn't work. But that's okay. And supporting each other. You know, this is a repair cafe. You have a repair cafe here. We went to visit the one today in Constant. Repair cafes are wonderful. This is in Pasadena, in Los Angeles. So in Pasadena, the way their repair cafe works is they have NASA and Caltech up the road. Lots of very smart people who can fix electronic things. So at the Pasadena Repair Cafe, you can bring your shoes or your curtains or your trousers or your iPad or your television, and someone will fix it free of charge. But they have one condition. The condition is that while they repair it, you sit in a chair opposite them and you tell them a story about your life. So I would ask you, what are they really repairing at the Pasadena Repair Cafe? For us in the transition movement, one of the things I think that distinguishes transition is saying that how we work together matters as much as what we do. Those of you here who've been involved in activism of any kind over the last 10, 20, 30 years will recognize a pattern of people who work really, 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 really hard because there's so much to do, and then they burn out. And then they work really, really hard, and then they burn out. And burnout is the plague of our movements, and we have lost so many brilliant people to burnout who we really, really needed. So in transition, we really try to say, actually, look after each other. we teach the skills for how do you run a meeting that you actually enjoy going to, where you make clear decisions, where everybody's voices get heard, where you know how to manage conflict and work with that kind of thing. These are the kind of, this is not just a kind of a revolution, if you like, which is about solar panels and carrots. How we do it matters as much, and that we're able to work together and to do that. In my town, we have a program where anybody who works at the heart of Transition Town is able, whenever they need it, to access free mentoring, counselling support, provided by local therapists, counsellors, psychotherapists, who that's how they want to support the process. And it makes such a difference to the levels of burnout, really. So it's really important, I think, that we look after that sort of thing. And weave your community back together again. We saw some beautiful examples today in Grand Sainte of things that are happening there. This is a story that some of you might have heard already, which is from the north of France in the Alsace, from a place called Ungersheim, where they're doing transition. They have a mayor there called Jean-Claude Mensch, whose father was a miner. He was a miner. He was a trade union representative for the miners. The mines closed in the 1980s, and like many places, they suffered the problems as a result. In 2011, somebody showed him a film about transition, and at the end of it, he said, "We'll do that, all of that." And they created these 21 actions for the 21st century, they called it. They created the biggest solar farm in the Alsace, 5.3 megawatts. They created a local currency called the radish. They brought Greenpeace activists over from Switzerland to teach young people in the school how to measure the solar potential of a roof from the angle and the orientation. How much solar energy could we get on this roof? And then they went around the whole village and mapped the whole place, and were able to say 77% of our energy could come from the roofs. They built this, they changed all the meals in the schools to like where we were today, to being organic. And they created an 8-hectare market garden to grow that food, to train local young people to grow that food. And they built this amazing building from mostly local materials as a place to process that and create more jobs. After 5 or 6 years now, they save 600 tons of carbon dioxide every year. They've created 100 jobs. They've built solar, they've built straw bale passive house projects. It's really fantastic. I went there to visit, and I felt a bit like the Queen going to visit. And they sold their school bus and they bought a horse, like in Grand Sainte. Actually, they have the same thing. So they had a Union Jack flag here and a French flag here, and took me around the town like the Queen. And the thing that so I gave a talk that evening, and a man afterwards, he came up to me, he was about 70, he said, "Rob," he said, "all this transition stuff's really, really great, but that horse is a bit much." I said, "What do you mean the horse is a bit much?" He said, "Well," he said, "the horse feels like we're going backwards." I said, "That's really interesting." I said, "I saw the kids this morning going to school, and they were all smiling from here to here. I don't remember a single day when I went to school on the bus that I smiled from here to here. There was magic. It was a magical thing for them. That they will remember that for the rest of their life. You know, do we really imagine that somehow this process of transition needs to be devoid of magic? Why can't we create as many magical moments as we can doing that process? There is a film called Qu'est-ce qu'on attend? Has anybody seen Qu'est-ce qu'on attend, the film? So it's a really great film which is made by Marie-Monique Robin, which tells the story of a year in Ungersheim. And whoever had the job of subtitling my appearance in it, I think had quite an easy job, because all I do is walk around and go, "Wow, wow, wow. Wow, wow." And what you see in this film that is so wonderful, I think, is nothing to do with the 21 projects. They're really good, they're really cool, they're doing good things. What you see is a community weaving itself back together again. You see, as the film goes on, people having more and more meals in each other's houses, people having more and more conversations, People saying, I don't feel lonely anymore for the first time. People saying, I feel part of something. I feel part of a process of change that's happening, and I have a role to play in it, and that's just fantastic. You see the mayor, you see the couple who grow old varieties of wheat to make bread. You meet the horse. You meet the woman who tells everybody they have to use the local currency all the time. I always wonder if actually, if we replaced the idea of gross domestic product as a measure of our success with the number of times that we eat meals in each other's houses every month, how different a society we would be. If we measured instead the number of children that we see playing in the street, these kind of things are much more useful measures, I think. So turning needs into opportunities. I have just 2 more of these, and then we'll have some questions. This is in Brussels. This is in a neighborhood in Brussels called Mille-Bruxelles. And Mille-Bruxelles is kind of the red light district. And many people who live on this street are involved in their local transition group, Mille-Bruxelles Transition. But they're also families, and they experience many of the difficulties of living right alongside prostitution. So one day their municipality said, we're going to put these 2 blocks of concrete here to stop men driving up and down the street all night. So they said, that's a good thing. But maybe we could do a little bit better than 2 blocks of concrete. So they said, we'd like to make a garden. So the municipality gave them the money for the materials, and then the people came out one Saturday morning and they built this garden. And it contains 13 beds, each one 1 meter by 1 meter, and each bed is managed by a different family. Now this garden is not going to feed the street. This garden is not going to feed one person on the street. But again, that's not the point. What happened after they built this garden was they noticed that for the first time anyone could remember, people stopped on this street and had conversations. That never happened before. When you would go out and start working in the garden, children would come out and start playing in the street. That never happened before. And one day, a tour guide, with the big tall flags like tour guides have, turned up with a big group of tourists coming to see the garden. And they said, what are you doing here? And I said, but you are now a vegetable tourism destination. In Totnes in Yorkshire, where the Incredible Edible movement started, they use this term, vegetable tourism. If you grow vegetables in unusual, interesting places, in creative ways, people come and see it. And they travel a long way to come and see it. I said, you are now a vegetable tourism destination. What happened that was brilliant after this was about 6 months after they built this garden, the refugee crisis in Brussels got very, very, much bigger than it had been. And people were coming to the place to register, and they had to sign in, and then they had to wait a week before they got an appointment. So people were sleeping in the park, and there was no facilities, and it was very difficult. So a group of people mobilized, and in 2 weeks, they built, using recycled materials, a place that could feed 1,000 people 3 meals a day, a healthcare center, a school. They were given so many clothes they had to hire a warehouse to keep them all in. And mostly they were people from this street. And I said, how did you get the confidence to think you could do that? And they said, from this garden. Because sometimes I think we imagine that there are people here who know nothing about climate change and the issues of the world and don't do anything. And then over here, there are people who know lots and lots about it and are doing lots and lots of things. And we imagine the only thing we need is to give the people over here a sufficiently terrifying, miserable DVD to watch on their own at home in the dark. And somehow they'll magically leap from there to there. It doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. You need steps. You need a project like this where you can take the first step and go, oh, this is good here. I like this. I know more people and I have more conversation and the food is better. And I now know all these people. I didn't know this is good. Maybe I'll take another step. Oh, this feels even better. I really like this. And we make these steps like this. I think as well we need to be bringing this idea of entrepreneurship into transition, because the idea that we're going to be able to make the scale of change we need to with everyone being volunteers is really naive, I think. We need to be creating work and livelihoods and a whole new economy for the places where we live. This is something we do every year in my town, which is called the Local Entrepreneur Forum. And the idea is that every year 5 people who have started a business, which is a kind of transition type thing, stand up in front of an audience like yourselves, usually about 400 people, and they say, my name is Rob, I want to start a bakery, I need a building, I need £10,000, I need someone to help me create a website, and I need someone to babysit my children while I go and see the bank manager. And we say everybody in this room is a potential investor. If you can lend someone a pen, you could lend someone 10,000 euros. You might have a building they could use. You might have an old kitchen that they could use. You might be a web designer or an accountant who could help them. And then people offer their support. It's fantastic. It's one of my highlights of the year. We now have 27 new businesses that have gone through this process, and it creates a real connection between them all. In the brewery, we go along every year, we choose 1 or 2, and we make a beer with them to support them. This woman started a business with making honey with rare kind of bees. We're going to be making honey beer with her over this year, which will support her enterprise. So this is, I'm going to end with this, and then we'll have some questions and discussion. I think this is something I saw in Denmark. I think we live in a time when it can feel like all the paths are already determined. Whether it's Amazon or Carrefour or whoever, these big companies, they have already made the paths. And we live in a time where we have very clever, very smart people who train in university to become brilliant designers of paths. And so they must be good paths because they're created by smart people, right? But actually, what many, many of you are doing, and what people in movements all over the world, and what you saw beautifully in the film Demain and in other things like that, is people who are creating their own path. It's a path where you don't need to wait for anyone's permission. It's a path that doesn't require funding from anywhere. It's a path that requires you connecting with those people that you connected with out in the hall before we came in, and seeing what you could do together. And my belief is that as we take those steps, that becomes the path. As you saw in the story from Liège, it becomes the path. Because the times that we are moving into demand these kind of solutions. Solutions that are more sensible, more beautiful, more nourishing, more creative. And you are as good as anyone as creating those solutions. So, thank you very much. Thank you. So, it is my experience from doing lots and lots of talks that questions are much richer if you have managed to if you have digested first. I have thrown lots of ideas, lots of information, lots of things that might be new to you at you. And so what I'd like to do is to give you 10 minutes with a pair that is different from the one you were in before. So you need to find somebody different. So you'll have at least met 2 new people tonight. And then spend 5 minutes each. So the first of you just chat for a bit. What was new? What surprised you? What questions did it bring up? And then after a few minutes, I'll give you a wave and then turn over so the other person does it, okay? And then we'll come back and have some questions. But the questions will be beautifully digested and rich and perfectly formed. Does that sound all right? Okay, so a different pair than the one that you were with before.
mais il faut dire à Michel et tout ça qu'il y a des gens qui passent. Non, mais est-ce que Michel est dans le coin? Bien Michel, qu'il y a des gens qui sortent. Allez, bien.
D'accord. D'accord. Ça recommence
Normalement, c'était marqué. C'est l'arrivée là. C'est le vernissage là, la 80.
Ouais, 80.
Il nous reste 20 minutes avant la fin de cet échange, donc peut-être on peut passer aux questions. Est-ce que vous avez pu faire...
Il faut préciser que les questions doivent absolument être posées avec le micro, sinon Rob n'entend pas la traduction de la question. Voilà. Et ma collègue Christine en face et moi avons chacune un micro. D'accord.
Ah bah c'est bon, tu t'en occupes pas.
Hello, bonjour, merci. Donc je pose la question en français. Moi j'avais une question. Le point que vous avez soulevé, c'est vrai, sur l'isolement et la solitude aujourd'hui qui devient un vrai problème, et surtout quand on est confronté à des situations de vie qui sont compliquées, qui nous tombent comme ça d'un coup. Et le fait de recréer du lien social qui semble important aujourd'hui. Comment on fait, et là je réagis sur la réflexion que vous avez faite sur le côté ne pas revenir en arrière, ne pas être rétrograde en voulant changer ce modèle de société, mais comment on fait pour éviter de retomber dans l'écueil de l'individualisme et de faire de ce qui s'est déjà produit et de faire qu'on en est aujourd'hui à cette situation de société quand même très individualiste. Comment on fait pour éviter ça, vous pensez?
Yeah, I think I think many people are really hungry for doing this stuff in a different way, and I love the stories of like the wine, making the wine in the street kind of projects. I was in Spain. I heard about a village where they have bitter oranges growing on trees in the square. Nobody picks them because they're bitter. So once a year they all go out. They pick the oranges. They make marmalade in the square. They give everybody jars of marmalade. There's a project as well in my town which is called Caring Town, where we bring together all the different organisations that provide care, and we work together in a different way. Work much more collaboratively, find those spaces where people can come together, and but we do live in a very individualistic society. I think we need to, the way to bring people together is to create events and opportunities that feel like really exciting.
But how do you avoid that it starts again once it's been... Ah pardon, sorry. Ok, je vais pas dire en anglais. Mais comment on fait pour éviter que ça recommence une fois qu'on aura recréé du lien social? Vous voyez ce que je veux dire? Comment on fait pour éviter que ça arrive de nouveau? Parce que je sais pas, est-ce qu'il y a quelque chose de différent à faire?
I mean, for me, I think we do that by the spirit in which we offer the things that we do. If we offer them in a context which is about inclusion, is about fun, is about conversation, is in the bigger context of transition, which is about building a new economy rooted in the needs of the people and which is there to serve everybody, then I think we start to change the quality of the discussion. Like we saw in the street there, they didn't build that garden and then all build little fences around their own little beds. They built they built that garden together. They felt a common sense of ownership, a common sense of purpose, which then manifested 6 months later in a project that was much bigger and even more motivated by those kind of intentions.
Moi, j'ai une question qui est peut-être dans le prolongement de celle-ci. On voit bien, vous nous avez raconté des histoires extrêmement positives, enthousiasmantes, et on voit bien que toute la stratégie de la transition, qui résonne un peu avec celle des colibris, d'ailleurs, consiste à véhiculer un imaginaire du changement, un imaginaire positif qui puisse rendre le changement nécessaire, mais qui puisse le rendre aussi désirable. Et ça résonne avec d'autres stratégies qui sont complètement différentes et qui se posent la question de, oui, mais s'il y a un projet d'aéroport, là, oui, mais s'il y a un pipeline qui doit passer dans tel territoire, comment on fait? Et et les réponses que ces mouvements apportent vont être de l'ordre du blocage, de l'occupation, parfois même du sabotage, etc. Et on entend souvent, enfin en tout cas moi j'entends souvent, opposer les deux stratégies et dire que finalement le problème de la transition, c'est qu'elle évacue la conflictualité dans laquelle nous sommes plongés malgré tout. Qu'est-ce que vous pouvez répondre à ça et comment vous percevez ces autres tactiques et stratégies des activistes environnementaux et comment vous vous situez par rapport à eux?
Okay, so I think we have to be really clear about there was a paper that was published in Nature 2 weeks ago which says we now have a 1% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees and a 5% chance of staying below a 2 degree increase in global temperatures because all the gains that we make get overtaken by economic growth every time. So when you look at it like that, and that our survival depends on it, projects like campaigns like the incredible imaginative resistance at Standing Rock that many of you would have followed recently in the United States, and people trying to stop pipelines and people putting their bodies in the way of new airports and things like that is absolutely vital. Absolutely vital. We have to have the actions that say, stop, enough. That's enough. But at the same time, you need the actions that are then building what comes next. And for me, sometimes people criticize transition because transition is not this, which is a bit, for me, like saying, this spoon is really terrible for cutting this loaf of bread. It's a different tool. It's designed for a different thing. And many people who are involved in transition, they do transition, and then they might also be involved in some of those actions as well. They're sometimes the same people, but sometimes they're not the same people at all. Because for some people, that kind of activism is far too scary, is far too extrovert. And some people are more introvert, and they like to work with other people, or they might be people who did this for a long, long time and are really burnt out. And actually then transition is a space in which they feel they can kind of flourish in that way. So we need the holding, the blocking actions, but we also absolutely need the building of a new story and building it in a way that feels invitational and delightful. So I don't see there's any conflict at all. They're different tools for different jobs.
Et on voit justement avec cette idée que la transition vise à quand même atteindre une espèce de masse critique, enfin je ne sais pas comment le formuler, mais l'idée que cet enthousiasme que génèrent ces récits est de nature à convaincre le plus grand monde de s'engager justement dans des démarches qui puissent conduire à un changement de société. Comment concrètement à Totnes, depuis 11 ans, que la transition est née, comment ça s'est mis en œuvre? Parce que ce qui frappe, notamment en France, où on se méfie beaucoup de l'économie et où les initiatives, et notamment les initiatives environnementales, sont portées par des bénévoles, etc. Et il n'y a pas de modèle économique, c'est un peu compliqué, etc. Comment vous avez impliqué finalement aussi bien les acteurs économiques locaux que les institutions, la municipalité et au-delà l'État anglais, etc. Enfin toutes les collectivités avec lesquelles vous avez eu à travailler, quoi.
I think sometimes people imagine that Totnes is a sort of Shangri-La. I remember one time we had a very angry German man came into our office. He said, "I've come all the way from Germany to see the famous transition town Totnes, and you still have cars." He said, "Well, you know." So for me, one of the things about what we do there is really important to make the point that it's not like everybody is involved. Mm-hmm. You know, we did a survey 5 years ago, I think it was 6 years ago, which said 75% of people had heard of what we were doing, 62% of people thought it was a good idea, 33% had some interaction. They'd been to an event or had some brushed up against it somehow. And maybe 2 or 3% were involved, were actively involved. You can do a lot with those people. 10, 15 people, you can do a lot with 10 or 15 people. And you need a kind of a core of people who are committed and stubborn and who want to make things happen. And then you have a big a group of people who will come and go and come to things and help out sometimes. And one of the beautiful things about transition is that it has a lot of surface area. So it's not like a single issue campaign. Do you agree with this? Do you not agree with it? In transition, there are projects about food, about energy, about education. There are projects where people come together and plant trees. There are film screenings. There are projects around building homes. So there are many, many different ways in. And I always wonder, when we do a big tree planting day, for example, how many of those people are there because they can't sleep at night about climate change? Probably not very many. People come because they like to meet other people and have conversation and that kind of thing. So in terms of, I think we've always tried to have a question of who isn't here who should be here. And we try to invite people. We changed our narrative and the way we talked about what we do to say we want to create a new economy for this town. And when we started to do that, we started to build really interesting links with different organizations and people who had a lot of those skills. I remember quite early on when we were doing transition, there were some local politicians who were quite skeptical, who thought we were quite mad. But I loved that they would go away from Totnes to go and represent the town at a meeting somewhere else in the country. And they would meet someone who would say, "Where are you from?" And he'd say, "Oh, I'm from Totnes." And they'd say, "Oh, transition town. Oh, yeah, I've heard about that. It's really cool." So the story around them started to change. Transition is a kind of a cultural change process. And as it's become more ambitious, we've made those connections with local businesses, with the municipality, with different organisations. And I think as we become more ambitious and achieve more as well, then there's more respect for what we do. And we've, I think, become one of the key sort of organisations in the culture of the town now, I think. Yeah.
Et ce qui caractérise la transition aussi, après je redonnerai le micro, hein, je ne vais pas monopoliser la parole, mais ce qui caractérise la transition, c'est qu'elle a été médiatisée à un stade très précoce finalement, alors qu'elle venait de commencer sa mise en œuvre, et qu'elle est très vite du coup devenue un réseau quasiment mondial, avec des initiatives qui ont fleuri un petit peu partout, et notamment en Angleterre. Est-ce que vous pouvez raconter comment vous avez perçu justement l'émergence de ce réseau que manifestement vous n'aviez pas tant que ça anticipé, et comment vous articulez les différentes mailles de ce réseau, comment vous travaillez pour maintenir ce réseau, et comment aussi vous apprenez, enfin quel retour d'expérience qui a permis d'enrichir ce que vous faites.
About 6 years ago, I got invited up to a meeting in London by a group of successful business people who like to support social enterprises. They rang me up. They said, "You are a social entrepreneur." I said, "Oh, thank you very much." And they said, "If you please come up and give us a presentation, and then if we like what you do, then we will help you out with some of our expertise." So, okay. So I went and I gave a talk for about 15 minutes. And then when I finished, there was a long silence. And then this man said, "So what you've done is create a very powerful brand and then given it away for free to people all over the world, and you have no control over them whatsoever." I said, "Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely what we have done." And sometimes people look at the spread of transition and imagine that it was carefully planned, like a sort of Coca-Cola franchise or something. And it really, really wasn't like that at all. We designed something with a simple set of values, a simple set of principles. We said, these resources are free. Everything is free. There is only one condition, which is that you share your stories. And we become a network, an international network of stories, of ordinary people trying to change things. Some things work, some things don't work, but we make a network and we share those stories. So there's now transition in about 50 countries, and as Transition Network that we set up, our role is really any power as such that we hold is to give that away. So we now have 40 countries that have their own national transition organization, and they are people who are doing transition in that place's point of contact, not us. And they translate materials and they run trainings. And so ultimately, for us, a sign of success would be that we didn't really need to exist anymore, which I quite like that idea. So we really try to model a kind of humility and a generosity and building networks.
Okay. Donc oui, d'autres questions dans la salle, monsieur, ouais.
Deux petites questions, dont une sera un peu provocatrice. La première, c'est que il me semble qu'il y a quand même quelque chose qui est très lié à ce que les gens ont comme possibilité de se donner l'autorisation à eux-mêmes et collectivement d'engager des projets. Cette question-là, elle n'est pas si simple, parce qu'elle peut être... elle n'est pas si simple, en particulier quand des personnes, des habitants, ont l'impression que leur vie est une succession d'échecs qui s'opposent à des obstacles incommensurables. Donc, comment œuvrer pour que cette autorisation puisse être nourrie, non seulement de la part de leaders, mais par les gens eux-mêmes, là, au plus local du local. C'est-à-dire dans le bas de l'immeuble, sur le quartier, etc. Ça, c'est la première. La deuxième, c'est que je n'ai pas été complètement convaincu par la réponse que vous avez faite sur le lien entre ce que vous faites du point de vue de la réalisation de projets et le lien avec les institutions économiques, politiques, culturelles à l'échelon local, mais aussi aux échelons à l'échelle nationale. C'est-à-dire comment ces transformations-là peuvent avoir une quelconque chance d'aller s'inscrire dans des objectifs politiques qui organisent la société. Et je ne pense pas, c'est là que je deviens un peu provocant, que l'action de minorité à 5 ou 6% puisse engager ce changement-là, sauf à devenir soit la dictature bienveillante que voulait Hans Jonas dans ses écrits sur l'écologie, soit à devenir la nouvelle avant-garde bolchevique dont on a connu et dont on a vécu ce que cela, les aboutissements. Mais c'est en provocation gentille.
Okay. So, what was the first bit again?
L'autorisation.
Yeah. So I think, I go to visit many different places where transition is happening, and in some places you have a very, very active transition group, and they have no response from their local government at all. There is no connection or response. Everything they do independently from that, but they get a lot of things done. And they get a lot of things done because they aren't threatening or provoking, they're involving people, and they're trying to work with needs that aren't being met by people further up. Then I go to other places, like I was in Grenoble recently, where they have where the municipality there are very keen on transition. They did their biennale all about ville en transition, but there are no transition initiatives. They said we have no transition initiatives in the city at all. How do we start them? Then you go to a city like Bristol, where the Bristol Pound is only possible because the government and the municipality are working, and the transition groups are working really closely together. That's when I get really, really excited. And we saw some tastes of that this afternoon in Grand Sainte, and you see it in Ungersheim, and you see it in places when those things start to work together. My sense is that we try and do things that aren't being done by other people, and people are really hungry for the opportunity to connect. And I've remembered your first question now. So that question about how do you involve people who feel completely disempowered and excluded is a really important question, because when you start doing transition, the people who come initially, who are initially attracted, are people who feel confident that they can, if they try and change things, they might change. That's not everyone's experience, as you rightly point out. They tend to be people who maybe have some skills, that they can organize events, they can promote events, they can bring people together. So then sometimes people say, why is our transition group all white middle-class people? Well, the reason is because initially those tend to be the first people who come, but also because if we expect everyone to always be volunteers, those are the people who can offer to do that. I visited Richmond in California a few years ago, met this incredible woman there working in a mostly black neighborhood, training young men to become urban food growers. And I said, I think we have, in our movements, we have a tyranny of volunteerism, this belief that if you pay anyone to do anything, that you toxify the whole thing. She said, that's brilliant to hear you say that, because if this is a revolution that depends on volunteers, I can't be part of it, and nor can anyone where I live. And I think in some places where people feel that level of despair and disempowerment that you're talking to, sometimes it needs some people to hold their hand and to work alongside them. And a few days ago I was in Les Mureaux, south of Paris, which had the big riots there about 20 years ago, issues around radicalization and problems like that. And they have the beginnings of, but the potentially a really fascinating transition project happening there, where they have people who have some skills and expertise, who are working alongside people in that community in a very collaborative way, and they are looking at a lot of this sort of new economy stuff. They are taken with this idea, which I just thought was brilliant, of the idea of how can we make Les Mureaux a really attractive destination for tourism, which seems like a mad question, right? But actually, when they approach it like that, they're starting to think, okay, what could we do? We could turn this place into one of the most beautiful urban farms in France. We could have a local currency here which celebrates our story and the new story we want to tell about this place. We could have a system where people in Paris could book to come and have a meal in people's homes. They could choose the best food from Senegal, from all the different places, and they could come and visit. So they're turning the perception of the place on its head in a really creative way, and then they're working with the people in a way, but they're kind of working alongside them and involving them. And I thought it was very, very skillful. So I think there are some places where transition works very easily because it clicks with people who go, I could do that. But when you have a population that go, I can't do that in a million years, then we need a different model maybe where we work alongside people and help people. And for me, one of the key steps is when we're able to take this stuff to a place, like I showed with the project in Totnes, where we're building houses, where we'll be training many, many people to build those homes. There'll be affordable homes in community ownership. Then we start creating a lot of work for people. You know, when the cooperative movement started in Rochdale in the mid-1800s, it was just an idea. 20 years later, they were creating many, many thousands of jobs across that whole region. People didn't stay up all night debating whether the cooperatives was a good idea. It was people's jobs. It was a new economy in that place. And that, I think, is where we need to get to. But in terms of the second question was about the...
the fact that maybe 5 or 6%
couldn't... I don't worry about that. I don't think... because I think... You know, we were hearing today in Grand Sainte about when the municipality said, we're going to stop cutting the grass quite so much so that we have more biodiversity. People said, oh, no, it'll look a bit messy and untidy. After 3 or 4 years, people get used to it. They appreciate the benefits of it. You know, what we're trying to do is not like a Stalinist sort of run in and change everything overnight. We're just adding around people. We plant trees. We put food growing on the train station. No one's ever come up to me and said, this town was a much better place before there was food growing everywhere. It doesn't happen. So each step, I think, that you take starts to change the atmosphere around and people's sense of what's possible and what they're comfortable with. Nobody is forcing anything on anyone. We just take steps. And every step that you take, I think, if you do it with a good heart and a good motivation, it starts to change what's happening around it.
Peut-être d'autres questions? On a le temps encore? Dernière? Ouais. Oui, alors juste avant, moi j'ai une question qui est, à laquelle vous avez partiellement répondu, mais une manière de synthétiser. Vous avez fêté vos 10 ans l'année dernière. Quels sont les principaux... quel est le bilan que vous avez tiré de 10 ans à la fois d'initiative à Totnes et plus largement de 10 années de transition, et quels sont les chemins qui se dessinent aujourd'hui? Alors vous les avez esquissés, c'est une ligne droite qui permet de faire l'économie d'une courbe, ça de désir, je crois, mais quels sont en gros quels sont les objectifs aujourd'hui que vous vous fixez pour les 10 prochaines années?
I think one of my main learnings from the last 10 years is the enormous amount of power there is in that moment when you go, so shall we? Yeah, all right. Next Saturday, 3 o'clock. Because you unlock something in that moment that is completely unpredictable. And I like to talk about tipping points. You know, there are tipping points. Every project. So, you know, I go to many places and I meet people doing transition. They say, well, we've started this project, but it's quite small. And this is not going to change the world, is it? It's quite small. And I always say, you never know. You never know where the tipping points are. You never know who will see that, who it will really change their perspective, their view of the world. I was in Berlin a few years ago in a place called Kreuzberg, a neighborhood in Berlin, and the transition group there had planted 30 fruit trees in their local park. Everyone said, you can't plant fruit trees in the park, they'll all get destroyed, the kids will snap them all, it'll be a disaster. And it took a year and a half to persuade the municipality to let them plant these trees. And they got the permission, and they planted the trees, and nobody touched the trees, it's all fine. A year after they planted the trees, the municipality changed its rules to say that they would only plant edible plants. So the list of approved plants that their landscaping team had to use was all only edible plants. But that change in policy was the result of that moment when that group said, let's plant the trees. So when you take that step and say, let's do something, you unlock so much that you just have no idea. There's so much potential. Where will it go in the next 10 years? I hope that in 10 years' time, transition, that economic model that I talked about, which takes the woodland as its basis, and the idea that what we want to do is to get money to circulate and do as much as possible before it leaves, that becomes mainstream economic thinking. Because if we do that, we can create an economy which is responsible in terms of climate change, which tackles the epidemic of loneliness, which is a public health strategy, which unleashes all kinds of creativity and connection. And so my hope is that in 10 years' time, we don't need to be here talking about transition anymore, because that's just how it is. And actually then maybe we can then just, get together and just have parties and enjoy what's happening and share our experience. How different does it look here than it looks in my town? And how different does it look there from what's happening in Barcelona? And we just exchange stories. But by then we feel like those ideas are just accepted and there's a momentum moving that way.
Okay. Alors, peut-être pour finir, on peut revenir, comme le suggérait Marnik, sur la rencontre d'hier, l'atelier d'hier, en fait, qui a réuni, je ne l'ai pas précisé tout à l'heure, mais une trentaine de personnes, dont peut-être d'ailleurs certains sont là dans la salle, mais je ne les vois pas, qui étaient à la fois des membres et des fondateurs d'associations. Certains travaillaient aussi dans des collectivités locales, auprès d'élus, engagés dans des initiatives de transition. Il y avait notamment quelqu'un de Grande-Sainte qui était là. Il y avait même quelqu'un qui travaillait à l'ADEME, etc. Et en fait, tous ces gens étaient venus hier autour de ce mot transition, étaient engagés dans des initiatives qui pouvaient être apparentées à la transition et qui se déployaient dans des champs très divers, de l'alimentation, de l'organisation d'événements, de jardins partagés, etc. Et ce qui était frappant, c'est que finalement, c'est des gens qui travaillaient dans des territoires très proches, voire dans la même ville, mais qui ne se connaissaient pas. Et justement, vous avez réussi à les mettre en relation. Et ce qui était très frappant, c'est qu'à la fin de la rencontre, tout le monde se disait « Ah bah tiens, on va se revoir, ah bah ouais, ce serait bien, ah ouais, on pourrait se voir à tel endroit, etc. » Beaucoup aussi ont émis le souhait que vous reveniez pour animer d'autres rencontres à l'avenir et poursuivre en fait cet échange. Donc voilà, je voulais peut-être qu'on termine là-dessus, c'est-à-dire comment planter une graine et comment vous aussi vous percevez cette rencontre. Est-ce que ça a fait germer chez vous une petite graine qui pourrait vous inciter à vous lancer aussi dans un projet de transition? Et puis voilà, comment vous avez perçu aussi ce territoire, sa dynamique, et est-ce que vous avez senti la possibilité aussi d'y faire émerger énormément de projets qui existent déjà mais qui ne demandent qu'à se connecter et à se lier.
Yeah, we had a really good day yesterday, and we had a great day today as well, visiting Grande-Sainte and seeing the fantastic projects that are happening there, from top-down projects to bottom-up projects, and seeing them working together. And what was really nice yesterday was a load of people who were all working in their own community, thinking they were the only people. And actually all around them there were other people who were doing the same thing and asking all the same questions and coming up with all of the same challenges. So my hope would really be that would become a regular thing, that people could meet up and share their experience because really this is something that requires connection and networks, and hopefully when we did, that was why we did the activity outside at the beginning, because when you know who the people are around you, it really, really helps. That you don't feel alone, you feel you've got people you can connect with and start to make things happen. We produced at Transition Network, we produced an online guide called The Essential Guide to Doing Transition, which is in French as well. If you have a look on the Transition Network website, it's a free download. It has what we call the 7 essential ingredients for getting started. It has lots of stories and case studies from different places of how people have started doing transition. There's a really good 2-day training called Transition Launch, and there are trainers in France and in Belgium who can deliver that training that really gives you everything that you need in order to get started. So if you feel inspired after today and you think, we could give this a go where we are, then you could organize a training, download the guide, maybe you could put on a screening of Demain. And what they did in Belgium was every time they did a screening of Demain, they then did a thing called Après Demain, the next day, where they would say at the end of the film, if you've been inspired by this film, there will be a meeting at 8 o'clock tomorrow in the bar over the road, and please come, bring the ideas of what you're inspired by, and we'll support you to make those things happen. So there's lots of different ways, and I'd leave you just with a story from a woman who rang us up at the Transition Network office one day and said, I live in a town in Australia, I'm really excited about transition, but I'm the only person in this town who is interested in transition. And we said, but are you really? She said, yeah, no one else cares about this kind of thing at all. Anyway, she rang us up again a month later. She said, I put an advert in my local paper saying, is anyone out there interested in transition? She said, I had 120 replies, and now we have a really active group. I think there are many, many people who are really, really hungry now, particularly after, I think Demain really, really helped, who are really hungry for a new story, for creating something else, for meeting people and starting to feel like change is happening. And hopefully today might for many of you be the first day of a new adventure, of a new story.
Merci beaucoup. Merci d'être venu.
Merci à vous.